Today's book, Bury Me in the Back 40, is the culmination of 10 years of observation by photographer Kyler Zeleny in his hometown. A close friend once told me, in this small place you can find the whole world. In the same way, this book shows us that by focusing on the local and the small and the intimate, we can gain deeper insight into the broader world around us. Welcome to the episode 11 of Small Photobook Cult. Please, if you haven't not signed up yet, do it now and leave comments under the episode, because we really would love to hear from you what you think about what we said in the episodes. And welcome, Kyler. I've been waiting for a lot of reasons to do this episode, and one of which it's because there are some similarities between your work and the work that me and my partner Camilla just published some months ago. So I'm really, really curious to hear something about this book.
Yeah, I think you. I'm excited to chat about it, but I have your book here too, and I think you did almost some things that I wish I did. I love this format. This is I brought it to a class that I was talking to a couple of days ago, and just this idea of being able to kind of flip through almost 4 books simultaneously is fun and brilliant. And I feel like also, we're supposed to be probably talking about my stuff, but we're just going to take a little side detour here. But I feel like your book is a book that other photographers probably wish they could do, and may have gone down the path of looking into and then realize that it's more complicated, or that the quotes coming back from the publishers are significantly higher because you're asking them to essentially make you 4 books and then sticking it all together into one. But anyways, going back, just the students seem to really enjoy it because I don't think they've ever, they've never seen a choose your own adventure photo book like that.
No, thanks so much. Really, your book is not like 4 different books, but at the same time, yes, in some way, because there are a lot of layers in your work. And yeah, well, first of all, I want to say welcome. I'm really happy that you are here speaking with me.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to be here. I think just based on the interviews you've already done, I like the format. I like how there's just a conversation, and images kind of flow in the back, and a conversation happens. So, but yeah, like the Bury Me in the Back 40 is, the entire thing is about layering, and it's all this idea of layering of history, and this idea of any document we create is maybe based on previous documents, and then it's all about adding to this idea, or either continuing the same idea or trying to subvert it to create something new. But it's all based on having a conversation with past texts, which is very much what Bury Me in the Back 40 does. But maybe I'll just launch in to the history of how I came to do this book, because it's quite different from my previous work.
Yeah.
Does that sound good?
Yeah. Just, you can start introducing the project, and we can start also to flip through the pages of the book.
Yeah. Okay. And so I'll give a little bit more back history on the previous 2 books, because this is now technically part of a trilogy, and this is the final book in that trilogy. And the trilogy is all about the Canadian Prairies, this very large area of Western Canada that most folks don't have any idea. They probably know it exists, but they don't know, what does the landscape look like? What do the towns look like? What do the people look like? So I'm interested in trying to unearth that. And that came in the form of a book with the same publisher. They're all done with the Velvet Cell in this series, for a Germany-based publisher. But that started in 2014 with the publication Out West. And it was about looking at these really small communities across Western Canada, the size of essentially Europe, this large geographical area that no one seems to know about or have any idea about who's there. And we looked at towns like of 1,000 or less individuals. That became the book. That was great. It led to another one called Crown Ditch and the Prairie Castle that came out in 2020, in the year of COVID. And that one was more about focusing on slightly bigger communities, more about landscape, Also folks and their stories, because the first book was really just about looking at these very small towns and not really focusing on the narratives of the people. It was more about this larger, more abstract idea of what this place was. So we're already at 2. And, in both of these books, the method was often driving a lot to a small town, staying there for some shorter period of time, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 8 hours, maybe a day or 2 at max, and then just kind of going on and doing the same thing over and over across the prairies, which leads to the third book that we're looking at right now on the screen, Bury Me in the Back 40, which was then supposed to be a close mediation of one specific community. And of course, a lot of these towns are different, but they have more similarities than differences, to be honest. They're all colonial settler communities formed by Europeans around 1895 to 1905. The structures, the materials are very similar. They're all like structured either perpendicular or parallel to rail tracks. A lot of them look the same, and they can, in some ways, act as a stand-in for other communities. One community can really represent 10, 20, or 30 communities. There is not that much cultural difference between them. They're all based around agrarian values and farming, whether that's grain or cattle. And then maybe you have some other communities here and there that like have mining or something, but largely it's farming based. And so the idea was, we've done these 2 books, but they're really like these larger things. They're looking at more ideas of the idea of place. What is the prairies? But it doesn't dive into one specific community. And so the third book is that look at one town, and this is a self-criticism of the last 2 books in the trilogy, or I should say the first 2 books, Out West and Rendition the Prairie Castles. They don't stick around long enough for you to actually understand a community. And so I did that with my hometown, which just made sense. So it's a town called Mundare, which is an hour east of the city of Edmonton, which I'm currently in. That's where I live. And it was just this community that kind of fit well as potentially being a stand-in for a lot of other communities, and one that I had familiarity with. So it just made sense. And so I started this project of, what do communities want to be, and what are they? And in the 1980, which is the province of Alberta, the province that I'm in, 75th anniversary, every small town was given some funding assistance to create these history books. And so these history books, and that's what you're looking at when you see the backdrop of these images, those are spreads from the actual history book. So I scanned the entire thing. And I mean, that was 1980. So we're looking at, that was 45 years ago. We're coming up to 50 years ago was this text produced. And everyone was happy to supply the story of their families into this book. It became a local history compendium, if you want to call it. And, it also talked about the social institutions in the town, and when the Queen came in 1923, and then when she, the next Queen Elizabeth, came in 1978, et cetera, et cetera. So it was this incredibly thick community-produced, community-led document. And every town across Alberta and Saskatchewan, those 2 prairie provinces, and potentially in Manitoba, I'm not familiar if they produced them, but every one of the small towns would have one of these books. So there's literally dozens, if not hundreds of them. And for our specific community, Mundare, the book is called Memories of Mundare, and it's highly coveted now. And this was a book that would be passed down, and folks would be trying to buy these. So it's almost like rare relic-esque text. But I thought it was a really great place to start as a backdrop, and as a way to kind of subvert, but also very, in a very real way, layer history. And this idea of how, history is not static and it's continuous and it evolves is a theme of this book. And this isn't an incredibly new or novel idea. There's other book producers that have done this before me, like Mac's Holy Bible, done by Broomberg and Channerin would be one. Bottom of the Lake by Christian Patterson would be another. Alejandro Cartagena, The Dummy's Guide to Home Ownership, also published by the Spell would be another. So, there's this these texts that are taking well-known or social texts and trying to subvert them in unique ways. And I thought it just made sense to kind of do the same thing with Bury Me in the Back 40.
It creates a layer that push the images in another layer, like in a different level in some way. Why this interest for places like this one?
That's one of those questions that's hard to answer. And I think so let's think about this. I've done, X number of stories for national papers about rural issues. I've got now at this point a PhD on what is essentially the prairies, or at least the visualization of prairie communities. And I've got 3 art books on it. So it's a good question. I don't know what the answer is, but apparently I am quite invested into this region. I think I didn't care too much about the way I grew up and where I grew up. Like, I'm a farm kid, so we grew up outside of the community of Mundare, but any town is also the formation, not only of the people inside, but the people that come and use that community as their hub, their center. But it wasn't until I did my master's in London, and I felt, I wouldn't say a sense of homesick, but that was the first moment where I felt like I wanted to be shooting and making work in the prairies. And so I think for me, it is a bit of it's like a cultural creative anchor. Spent a lot of time in the last year in the US trying to write and photograph, and not feeling it the same way that I felt it, or that drive that makes one want to do documentary work that really doesn't pay well. It is like a labor of love. You have to enjoy the process often. Maybe some people get paid well. I'm not one of them. My hands, my eyes, my bones were all formed here, and I have a real interest and connection with this land. I still have a lot of family members. I work in that community as well. There, I have family members that still live out there. And I think it's a really interesting region. I also think it's very underdocumented. Like, it's, as I've said, depends on how you want to define it, but it's the size of Europe. And there's very few photographers. There's me making books. There's another fellow named George Weber, who's now in his 70s. But, he was making work in the 80s and 90s. And that's kind of it for people making photo books on the prairies. 2 individuals for something that is the size of Europe, at least Western Europe. And I don't know, I felt like, we as Canadians have, we've been described as the first post-nationalistic nation, in this idea that we don't really have the same type of history and nationalism, that we're kind of a colony of the British and of the French, and now we're more of a cultural colony of the Americans. And so for me, it was also important to create projects and texts that were about this region that doesn't have a lot of documentation on it. It's a very large, it's a geographically large, and then population-wise, still significant. There's millions of people that live here, and no one seems to have much understanding of what our visual culture looks like. I don't know. I'm like drawn to these small towns. Also, you ever go to a place and you just can kind of feel the history of it, where you can walk around and you can sense what something might have been like in the past. So, for instance, going to some of these small towns and talking to locals, like, this is a community of maybe only 700 people, but they would talk about, on Friday nights, there was the town hall and then the country hall that was in the middle of nowhere. And both were full with hundreds of people who were there to socialize, to drink, and to dance. And it's just completely different now. A lot of these communities, skeletal versions of what they had been in the past. And I think there's almost something a little sad about that and worth documenting, that a lot of these places are disappearing. And then when they disappear, when we lose them from our social record, without documenting them, they seem to not exist, or like they don't exist then. My practice is also about collecting stories of not only a region that struggles to have its own kind of culture, but then also just of a region that is, from the small town perspective, the cities are growing, but the small towns are dying away. And what does that mean for the way that we think about the region as a whole?
I don't know if it happens in this project, for example, with you in that place, but it's also a different experience of time. Like the time flow in a different way.
Both of those concepts are things that I write about in the first book, Out West. So I think you're primed to be understanding the entire series. And it is one of those things where you can walk down a street and you have a hard time figuring what decade you're in, which can be kind of, maybe a little surreal, but is generally quite nice. This idea of being able to kind of return to the past, even when we're kind of living in the present. And every one of these small towns kind of operates like that. There's probably a way to like categorize people into, are they living largely in the past, the present, or the future? An individual who looks back and is ruminating, are they a person who is in the moment and lived life in the present, or are they someone who is a planner and is making decisions now based more on a future? And I think if you look at the work that I've done, especially in the theories, but also with the Found Polaroid book too, is I am an individual who's stuck a little bit more in the past. And there's, I think, nothing wrong with that, but I think it's an interesting kind of process to do. And you can use like a car analogy. Are you driving in the car? Are you existing in the car? Are you looking out the front windshield to see what's in the future? Or are you looking in the rearview mirror trying to understand what's in the past? And I think a lot of the work in the series, especially the first two books, is about looking at the past. And I think the third one changes a little bit. And although we're looking at the past, we're trying to project a little bit better into what the potential future of this kind of community is. So, I mean, one thing we really haven't talked about is in Bury Me in the Back 40, like the work's about tension. It's supposed to be overwhelming. Then that's partly the reason that we see as many images as we do, that we see the layering. The work is supposed to be rather heavy as well, and light at other times. But I really wanted to, I wanted to dive in to a community and express, and I've used this analogy before, but I wanted this book to essentially be a rose. I wanted it to be the thorns, and I wanted it to be the flower. And I didn't want those things to be something that you can separate. I think any true, complex, and beautiful place is something that you feel in your heart and your gut. It has to be something that you have appreciation and maybe reverence for, but it should also be something that you have distaste for. Like I think it's like a home or a family, and you don't need to always love everyone and in the same way, and you could be annoyed with them and dislike them and hate them at times, but you also still have to love them. And I wanted this final book to kind of walk that tightrope of embodying elements of the community that would push me away, but also the ones that keep always driving and drawing me back. And so I, whether I did that successfully or not, but I will say, like, the feedback from this book's for a number of people. It's for people outside the region to understand the region, for people inside the region to have a better understanding of what the region is. But it, like, low key, this book is for other prairie individuals who have left their small town feeling that they didn't belong there, or they didn't like it, or there wasn't enough opportunity or services, to have them come back, at least in some sort of mental element and realize how special that place was and how much love they actually have for the way that they grew up, even though they have no interest in living there now.
Is there right now people coming back in that places, or is just people leaving?
There's a lot of these communities, and a lot of them I would say are losing services, things are closing, the population is aging. We're currently experiencing a real population boom in Canada, and especially in the province of Alberta, where I'm from. So just for like context, the city I'm in, Edmonton, and the other large city, Calgary, have both over the last 10 to 15 years gained a population of 20 to 25%, which is significant. That's a lot of people coming to live in these cities in a pretty short period of time. Whereas small towns will see the population probably stay at a growth rate of about 1%, maybe near zero, and with an aging population. So, new people come into the community. It's not uncommon, and it depends on a number of factors, which might just be more sociological and might be kind of boring conversation to have. But generally, the population kind of just stays the same, but the services just get a little, it seems like less of a community feel. And one of the things that was really special about these types of small towns, everyone knew everyone interacted with everyone through dances or like the curling bonspiels or hockey tournaments or the Agra days that happened in August. There was a very close social cohesion in every one of these communities. And it's talked about in this Memories of Mundare book, the backdrop for my photos in this project, is how much cohesion there was. You can glean from the text that this was a close community, and this is not uncommon. And that's also kind of a sad thing, not only for these small towns, but also for cities or spaces in general. We don't have the same level of community. Our communities are now more insular, based around Netflix or HBO, things you can watch in your home, or they're more also international. We have friends that are far away that we can keep in contact with, but what ends up getting sacrificed for that is like a more close feel of community within one's close area where they can either walk or bike or drive for 5 minutes. And so, the communities are staying kind of stagnant, but stagnant in this world is often a bad thing, especially with an aging population. So I foresee like a general crisis for these types of communities, specifically Mundare, because it's close in proximity to Edmonton. It has, like, you can commute if you wanted. It has a nice golf course that's been built in the not too long past. And they also have like a pretty successful key business within the community. But other towns won't survive the same way. And then they just kind of disappear. And then there's a couple houses, and then there's more land, and then there's a few houses. And then you kind of forget that there was ever a town there.
Yeah, but this is why I ask you if there is people coming back, because of what you said before is really fascinating to me, especially looking at a project like this one. The fact that this sense of community that is, don't exist anymore at all in the city. Like I noticed that somewhere is pushing the people to coming back in places like this one.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, I think that's part of the reason that folks come out. The housing is more affordable. It's cheaper. You can buy land. You can build a house. You can just buy a house. In the city, it's a lot more difficult to do that. Of course, there's trade-offs, right? You have less services and amenities near you in small towns. But I think folks also come to these places because they want things that are quieter. They might want to, the idea of a cute town is something that is built into the psyche of North Americans, Canadians, and Americans. This idea of small town Main Street and what it meant to the idea of America specifically, maybe. But that idea is kind of gone too, right? Like, someone can move to that community with this idea of, I want to be more embedded in a community. I want to have close ties with the people that are my neighbors. A small town seems like a great place. And then they get there and they realize I might have missed that bus. That boat's gone. Like we've already lost that sense of community. And it may come back. It might not as well. More likely, it's not going to come back. So younger folks, I think often find that there isn't much for them in those communities. And if they wanted a closer relationship with nature, then I think those kind of individuals, those families, those folks end up going to acreages and farms, and they, might service and use some of the amenities of a nearby community or small town, but they're often not that integrated. I think in a general sense, as we increase our technological fluidity, our interaction with devices, screens, I think we lose this really simple, basic thing of just interacting with one another. And I'm guilty of that too. I'm trying to figure out how to do that better, put away my phone. And it's also wild to see. I thought this was like a youth thing. Seriously.
Yeah.
Like we're as younger individuals, we're glued to our phones, the millennials and the Gen Zs. But I look at my parents and my aunts and uncles, and we're at, family events now, and they're the ones that are more on their phones than us. It's now affecting everybody.
And Kyler, I want to ask you about the pink text that seems to be typed notes inside the book, but I don't see that small paper here in the PDF. Do you have one there with you for reading it and maybe for talk about it?
Yeah, which I'll try to see if I've never read one. So they kind of represent changes. And they're essentially a text from an unknown individual who I'm having a conversation with. So if you want, I can read one. I'll read the first one. Sound good?
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So, little pink paper. Dear Kyler, March 20th, 2023. I thought more about our conversation about the birds and what it means when you hear a Wilson snipe but cannot spot one, and when there is no water in sight. Bird away from its natural surroundings is always a cause for concern, or a showing of things to come in a deeply sinister sense. It made me think of this poem that might ring true for you in your journey. Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing, and when you have reached the mountaintop, then you shall begin to climb, and when the earth shall claim your limbs, then you shall truly dance. Your friend and prairie spirit.
Like who wrote it?
So I've always, so far, I've left that open to interpretation.
Perfect.
But I mean, we're now this will probably be one of the last times I talk about this work and its own kind of, well, that's what I think, but probably not true, but its own holistic nature. And it's been a year since the book launched. I think we maybe have like 5 or 10 copies left before it's fully sold out. So, I never wanted to, say who wrote them, but I don't have a problem now that we're kind of at the end of the journey with the book, and I'm mentally starting to think about the next thing. But
as you like, Kyler. If you don't want, it's okay. If you want to keep the mystery and the secret, as you like.
No, I mean, if someone wants to keep the mystery, they can start pausing it now for say 2 minutes, and if they want to know, then they can keep listening. So I wrote them myself. This was a very close and personal project. It was about going to my hometown, very much a return. And returns are interesting things, especially when you try to do creative work around a place that is always been so familiar to you. It's hard to see anew. It was a real challenge, and also why it took so long when it could have maybe taken a few years less. This project started. I think some images from this book are from 2014. So there's images in the book from over like a 10-year period, and it did take a lot of time and effort to sit and try to understand what I wanted. This very much like an anthology of small town living, but also almost like a diary of sorts. But through this process, I had these tensions, and you're thinking about the work, and you're not wanting to misrepresent, but you're also wanting to represent the community in the way that you see it, which is potentially complex. And so I'd have these conversations with myself about things while I was out photographing, because it seems quite solitary. I mean, what we do often is a solitary practice: photographing, walking around, producing, editing, sequencing. It can be highly social, yes, especially when you're interacting with people, taking photos of them, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of the time, that the heavy lifting, the why am I doing this? What's it for? What's today's photos, and what do they mean, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a real cerebral element to that, where we have conversations with ourselves. And so for me, this was a way of actually thinking about what I was doing, but then also writing down some text. And I just like the idea of this is where the idea first came from, is what if there was someone in the community who was a holder of knowledge, a local sage, and that could have conversations with me about the work that I'm producing in the community. And so I essentially dreamt up the person and had conversations with someone who doesn't exist, as a way to just add a little bit of someone else's voice into the book, because this is once again, based on how things are layered. We're seeing the history book from 1980. We're seeing my images. We're seeing images that I've modified. Archival photos that I've taken from people's homes are included in the work, changed in their size, or like I said, maybe modified. I wanted to increase the plurality. I wanted to have another voice, and that those pink texts are another voice, although coincidentally enough, they are just kind of coming from me as well.
The texts are 4, right? In all the book.
Yeah, there's 4, and each represents a season. There's also a theme to each one, and there's coordinates to each on the back of the pink paper. And so if you actually graph those coordinates based on the themes, it creates an X. And in the center of that X is the scene that we see in all 4 of those images. Okay, I had headphones on, but they just died, so...
It's okay.
We spent way too much time chatting before we started.
It's true.
So it was all good. But yeah, and so there's if there's 4 of those images, and it's the ones with the field and the electrical line running through it. So if you keep going, you'll see one.
Not this one, right?
Not this one. No, it's the full that one. So there's 4 of these images.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where each one of those 4 pink inserts sit. Yeah. So that might be the spring one. And then that's the summer. That one looks like fall.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to understand the season.
Yeah, and so there's the 4 pink papers, the inserts, and they're stuck into all these spreads. And on the back, there's coordinates. So if you take the coordinates, they make an X. X marks the spot of this location. Generally, I think you want to make a text that when someone reads it, they fully understand it. And this is not meant to be fully understood, at least not easily, not quickly. It's supposed to be a work that has hidden meaning and Easter eggs in it, which I think is fun and maybe something that people discover on their second or third reading if they want to go back to the book. And so there's a few little call them hidden Easter eggs that I won't share, but they exist. There's things that have been changed and modified and moved in the images in very subtle ways. But this one's a little bit more communicative. There is these coordinates, but if someone does map them, then they find this location. But it might take someone a bit of time. I think most people won't won't spend the required energy to do so. And so it's also one of those, it's like a comment of, the slower you are with the work, the more you're going to be able to pull from it.
So you said that there are more Easter eggs that you don't want to share with us, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But some are, and like there's simple things like the beginning of the use of like AI to augment or change a photo here or there, or putting, a figure in a space that isn't there, or removing something, or combining different images together in a seamless fashion so you actually can't tell what part of the season the photograph was taken in. So there's a whole bunch of that, and I like that it's there, and I like that I'm probably never going to fully divulge all the little things that have been done.
Yeah, but I want to know that later. At the end of
I might tell you. I might I would tell you at least one. Maybe you'll have to message me every couple of months and I'll reveal something new.
It's amazing. Let's do it. No, but with voice messages, so I can add to the episode maybe in the end. And how was the book received by the community? And also, I was working with them.
I was pretty worried about how folks would perceive the way that I was presenting the book, because it wasn't, as I've kind of mentioned, it wasn't supposed to be. We use the word boosterism. And this was this idea that you talk about a place, you kind of boost it up. You talk about a place in high regard, you don't talk about it negatively, almost like community pride. And I didn't want this book to be that. I wanted it to be a real reflection of how I feel about a place that I really do love, but I love it because it's not perfect. And I was worried that other folks wouldn't understand that. And so, from like an anxiety perspective, like this work was very hard for me to do, because it was about a community that I care about not hurting. And, folks might not understand what I'm doing. I mean, it is kind of a complicated text, even in terms of the way that Photobooks go. This is not an easy photo book to understand. And that was the point of it, right? Was that it was a hard text. But you ever have that feeling? I don't know. So maybe some folks listening might, or this idea of going back home, and you have like this, you're excited, but you also have some anxiety about it. Excitement and anxiety are very close. They mimic themselves physiologically a lot. So we sometimes get confused about which one we're feeling, but that feeling of just like uneasiness and sweaty palms and being in a familiar place once again that you haven't been in a long time. It's a really interesting feeling to come back to a place that you know very well, but haven't known in a long time because you've been gone from it, and then you return to it. And so I had all these kind of like, I don't know, concerns and thoughts, and they kind of hindered the process a little bit. They slowed it down. But in the end, the book was produced, and the feedback has been nothing but positive from the community members. Like I've showed the work to a bunch of people that are in the book. So I have like a little series of them holding open their spread, giving the thumbs up. It's fun. And when I was doing the work, folks just kind of, because that's Robin Cheryl's son who takes photos. And they would just kind of let me into their house because I'm a local. I would go to people and I would just say, can I borrow your family albums? I'm doing a project on the community, and they had no issue with it. So I take their precious family albums away for a couple of days, scan the images that I think I might use, bring them back. And so, doing a project, having a camera is a great license to get into someone's house and just start going through their closet. It's pretty unique how it's kind of one of the only ways you can do that without needing a court order or a search warrant or something. And people are so open towards it. So the community was generally quite positive. I've only had one negative comment, and I just don't think they understood what I was trying to do with the project, and that's fine. And I tried to say that this seems like copyright, but I don't think they understand how copyright works and stuff. But it's okay to disappoint some people with this type of work. But I generally think everyone has been quite happy with it. I also feel a great deal of indifference.
Yeah, of course.
In that, like, these people are, they live in this town. They're going about their lives. They're busy enough. They don't care about some book with photos in it and what it says or means. And that's fine too. But like the town generally, like the library has a copy. They wanted me to come do a talk. The local school wanted me to come talk to the students and stuff. And we're actually right now doing there's this incredible small town museum there. It's run by this religious order called the Basilian Fathers. And right now just doing an exhibition with them of another photographer from the prairies, his name's Oris Shemchishin, who was born in Mundare, who photographed during the 60s, 70s, and 80s before kind of retiring. So I have some of his work that I'm just showing there. So they're, the community's been like generally receptive to it in a positive sense. But for how long I was working on it, I was always worried about how they would perceive this. And if someone would say, Kyler, how could you misrepresent our community? And I talk about in the essay as well, in the back of this book, Bury Me in the Back 40, about some of the deviance and darkness in the community now, and like how a lot of it was about drinking and how that was cultural. That's a lot of what this essay is about. Like, on page 162 right there, let's have a shot. Taking a shot means to have a drink, and you kind of do that anywhere. I wanted to make a book really, and the text helps us discover some of this is not about what a community wants to be, but what it is, Yeah,
of course. 100%.
Yeah, this is what you're telling people you are and how you want to be perceived, but what are you actually? And I think you can have that conversation about any place. I think you can have that conversation about individual people. And I think it's a really interesting kind of practice or a way to approach work. And so that's what the book is very much about. But, so this is a Ukrainian-based community. It was settled by Polish and Ukrainian individuals. This is, outside of Russia or Ukraine, the largest diaspora of Ukrainians in the world is this region. So, and if anyone knows anything about Eastern Europeans at the beginning of the 20th century, is they like to drink. Even the title alone, Bury Me in the Back 40, took on a fair bit more meaning just from that feeling. Maybe now is a good time to even talk about what the title is.
I was asking about that. But before, I want to say that it's quite crazy to listen to you presenting this work, like for me especially, because it seems like me presenting our work, it's really similar, and you are talking about a place that it's in North America, in the middle of like snow in winter, and we spoke in our project of a place that is in the middle of the south of Italy in the sea, in the Mediterranean, because it's an island. And the same when you spoke about the fact that when you go to represent a small community, you are going to find so much layer, and you have to dig inside a lot of things, and you have the privilege to be really close and in contact in a deep relationship with the people, but also you are scared that you don't want to hurt the feeling, but at the same time you want to do like a proper work.
You're just trying to make it the way that you perceive or feel it. At least that's what I was trying to do with this project. And I think the fact that you're doing something very similar across the pond, as we call it, is also very indicative of like how universal these themes are.
Yeah.
And we're speaking maybe different languages, we're viewing different communities in different climates and geographical regions, but the connections of community and individuals to the spaces that they're living in is the same, right? And just to kind of build on what you've mentioned, which applies for this book as well, is no place will reveal itself all at once. And And place is also different for different people, and it's perceived differently. And I think that's also what is really fun. We can talk about being playful in a little bit, but I think what's really fun about your book is that there's so many ways to view it. Like it's sequenced, but it's unsequenced because we have, you have essentially 4 different books that are meant to be, from my understanding, read simultaneously, and there's really no determinant on like what order you're flipping which one in.
So Kyler, I want to know about the title, and then I have a question that is linked to what we were saying before.
So titles are, I don't know if you've found that with Thinking Like an Island, but titles are tough.
Yeah, it's super. Months and months of thinking, and then you come back to, like in our case, to the first idea that is.
Yeah. There's this like discussion, like Alex South talks about in the book from here to there, about the importance of titles and how you want to like. I think that kind of spooked me a little bit because I was like, oh no, and I have to really like think about good ones. But I wanted it to be somewhat kind of flowy and poetic. And so we ended up with Bury Me in the Back 40. And even to folks who live in my region, that phrasing back 40 is not fully known. We're trying to bring it back a little bit as well, at least regionally. So the back 40, historically, you would get a piece of land from the government, and if you were able to, the phrasing was prove it over a period of time, maybe two years. To prove it was to like clear it and then plant a crop. If you could do that, that was then your land. You received it for free. So this was highly appealing to people in Eastern Europe that were maybe living under some sort of like version of like late serfdom, didn't own anything, or like poor folks in cities who didn't own land and were workers. It was a great opportunity for folks to come by steamship or whatever, then by rail to the middle of nowhere where there was nothing, and to start to clear a piece of land, and then to try to make it something where you can have a family and have put down crops and whatnot. So they'd give you either like 80 acres, it was called, or 160, and you'd place your farm kind of in the center of your plot. That way you're equidistant to all the land that you are farming. And so the back 40 is the 40 acres behind the household traditionally. So it's kind of a phrase that still exists, is like the back 40. And so for us, we have our back 40 and it's a pasture. And growing up, that's kind of always been a very like sacred place.
Yeah.
My anxiety, which is like, a normal, I'm an adult amount, and it shows up every once in a while, but it was always the lowest in that space. And it was just an open prairie that just kind of led to a larger kind of grassland area that we had. And I spent a lot of time there growing up as a bored kid on the farm. And then I was just kind of thinking of like, where would I want to be buried? I don't love the idea of cemeteries. I'm not really a good Catholic or anything. And so I think it would be beautiful to be like buried here. So Buried in the Back 40 is kind of the title. So, and even in the title, there's a representation of like what the wider book is, right? So it's meant to be dark, but then also with that bit of like warmth, it's about death, the title itself, but it's also about understanding that there's like a happiness to like a place that we want to be buried.
And are you happy with the title right now or not?
I wouldn't know what to change it to. So I think it's a little too poetic potentially, but I also, I love doing the taglines too in titles. So it's, the full title of the book is Bury Me in the Back 40, a personal anthology of small town living. I think it sounds better when it's all that. It's a lot of words, but I think that's a fun exercise to think about is if I was to change the title, what would I change it to?
Yeah.
They don't have I don't have a like I don't know, did you go back and forth? Like, is there a title for yours that you'd like to have, that's different than Thinking Like an Island?
It's always a mess. I watched the masterclass of Alex Ott too, like years ago, and I think a lot of photographers grew up with this idea that Sleeping by Mississippi was an amazing title.
Yeah,
and it worked really well. The same with Broken Manual. It's really hard because you have to reach that point.
I like the title. I'm good with it. That's not what keeps me up at night. The second book in the trilogy, Crown Ditch and the Prairie Castle, I really like that title. There's meaning behind that one. And then I go back to the first book, Out West. I feel like that's a little basic, but it's also, I don't know, it might just be simple enough.
Yeah, but also like sometimes basic works better than something else.
Yeah, I mean, like Sothe talks about in that book from here to there, he talks about the titles that it seems like lazy now to include American in the title. And I mean, so Kyle McDougall's book does that. He's I'd say a friend of mine, so I'm not trying to. I think an American Mile is good, but there's like Matt Black did American Geography. I don't know how great that is. I think there's another book called American Cowboy. Like books about America love to say that they're about America. If you notice that or not. The other book they were talking about, like 12 Acres, like that's a nice. I don't know, a title that's not overly descriptive, I think is fun. Like even talking about Matthew's book, like Dog Breath, like what a weird name for a photo book, but it's perfect at the same time.
Yeah, it's true. And I also really like when he explained to the podcast why the title it really works. It's perfect. I want to ask you if there are like a picture that you were specifically scared of that you took and then you thought, fuck, maybe it's gonna to make some troubles with the community.
The local?
Yeah.
I think those photos never happened. Honestly, I don't get that feeling from any specific image. I think I just didn't. I like the work, but I'm also disappointed in myself with it that I didn't go darker.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't try to go into more doors. Just darker doors. And so some of those images, talking about, for instance, what would have been good to have some portraits of some of the more modern drug usage. And there's definitely some photos I just kept out because it was, maybe some more transient folks or some like there's a couple of pictures of some local alcoholics. I just didn't put that in. It didn't feel like it added enough to the story to kind of overcome wanting to. It didn't justify inclusion, but talking about, I don't know, shortcomings and disappointment, I also think it's a good thing to be like open about too, and just to understand, like not everything is perfect, and I think it's better to have it exist in the world and be shed some of that perfectionist tendencies to share something that otherwise won't be able to get out the door. Like there's, I don't know how many photographers but I know a handful that have good work who just either just don't have they just don't feel the work it is done, and then it never goes anywhere.
Yeah, of course.
That's the tragedy.
But yeah, this is another like hard topic because it's really, really hard to understand when the work is done. So Kyler, I have some standard question that I ask all the time. Like there is a kind of music that you suggest to listen going through the book.
Ooh. I'm just going to quickly look up that name. Yeah, Willie Carlisle. He's very much producing music in, I don't know if you want to necessarily call it the American South, but he's like Eastern Seaboard area. Like one of his recent albums is called Critterland. So very much about critters in the land. It feels very Appalachian. but the way that he speaks poetically about places, I think, is a great pairing with going through this book. I think he was the person or artist I listened to the most in the last year, the year after the book came out.
Do you have some advice for young photographer or people approaching photography right now that you discovered doing this project?
Yeah, two things, I guess. They're probably related. It's okay to fail. It's okay to backtrack and to rethink. It's going to make you, likely a better artist to do those things. Continue to rethink your process and how you're doing things and why you're doing things. So, in that sense, you can sometimes maybe be hard on yourself. But the additional advice I would give is to also be kind to yourself. And I think try to go back to the beginning of, why did you start the project? And can you, write that out even potentially when you're starting something. Write out what you're trying to achieve, what the feeling is, why you feel driven to do that, and potentially refer back to that, especially for long-term projects. That you have to have a lot of energy to sustain projects that, a lot of this work is stuff that if you don't do, no one's going to care that you'd stop doing it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's easy to quit because it's not really paying the bills. It's the stuff that we do on the side because we love to. And so it's easy to quit because no one's knocking on the door saying, you have a deadline, you have to make this deadline, you must do this thing. So, I mean, if anyone, maybe a little quick plug, I'm doing a course with Main Media that is I think it takes place next month, but it's sometime in the summer. But you can the course can be found on Main Media's website. But it's about how to start and sustain doing a long-term documentary project and tips and tricks along the way that my process and also other photographers will have on. I think Alex South did Bogota a couple of days, and then some things take 10 years. So different paces.
And the very last question is a book that you suggest us to have in the podcast in the future.
One thing that I'm really excited about that I just got on my shelf is a book called Glory Land by a photographer named Robert LeBlanc. I think it's a lovely project. It's a project that I myself almost did a little bit of, but never did. And so not only is it an interesting topic, it's about snake handlers, religious snake handlers in the American South. It's beautiful as a kind of a topic, but the book itself, I'm holding it right now, and it's like the most beautiful Bible you've ever seen. And as soon as you open it up, you realize that this is very much an art book.
Kyler, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like, honestly, it might be one of the last times I talk about this book for a while. So,
so we're lucky because it's going to be saved there somewhere, and the people can keep listening at it.
Yeah, that was good. It was. Well, I mean, I don't know. I thought it was good. Did you think it was good?